They used our pain as PR, took our names, our stories, our deaths, and turned them into bonuses. I buried friends while they drank wine at donor galas. I wasn't planning on justice. But justice came anyway, and when it did, it wore my name.
My name's Roy Beckett. 59 years old, ex-Army, 2 tours in Fallujah, 1 in Kandahar. Came back with more steel in my knees than in my damn toolbox. 3 Purple Hearts and 1 useless shoulder. I don't wear the medals. They don't keep your fingers warm at night. These days, I volunteer down at St. Luke's Outreach Clinic in Louisville, Kentucky. A halfway house, med unit, soup kitchen, depends who's asking. It's where the forgotten end up, guys like me who never figured out how to turn PTSD into a LinkedIn skill set. I mop floors, distribute meds, break up fights when someone's withdrawal hits hard. I fix the broken dryer when it eats someone's only shirt. That kind of place. I don't ask for anything. I already owe this country too many debts I'll never collect on. But I know how to watch. I see things. For a long time, I watched Mary. Executive director. Hair always perfect, voice smooth like honey left on the stove too long. She talked like a donor letter, sweet, crafted, full of sympathy. She smiled at cameras during food drives, shook hands with senators, ran the show. The donations came in heavy during COVID. Real heavy. Local church groups, state grants, even corporate matches. We used to struggle to replace light bulbs. Suddenly, we had an espresso machine in the break room and a digital engagement officer with his own office. Meanwhile, our vets slept on ripped mattresses and reused gauze. You ever see a man with a diabetic foot ulcer limp across linoleum in December because the heat's been shut off in one wing? I have. Twice. I asked Mary once calmly, like someone still believes in people, why we never seem to upgrade anything the residents actually used. Budget cycles, she said, brushing lint off her coat like I'd handed her a leaf. Funds get allocated months in advance. You know how grants are. Yeah, I do. I've read them. I helped write 2 once back in 2017 when no one else knew what federal compliance meant. That's when I started looking closer. Our books were clean on paper, but the numbers didn't add up. We had a $250,000 injection from the Department of Housing and Urban Development last October. I remember the check ceremony. Hell, I shook the congressman's hand. They posted it on Facebook. Roy Beckett, veteran, volunteer, hero. That money was earmarked for expansion and medical staff salaries. We didn't get a single new bed. The night nurse was fired 2 weeks later. When I asked about it again, I got moved to the garden unit. There's no garden. They didn't fire me. Too risky. I'm the poster boy after all. Too many press photos. Too many plaques with my name. They just wanted me quiet. Forgotten. But here's the thing about men like me, I've lived through ambushes. I know how silence works. You let them think you're buried. You let them stop watching. Then you come up behind the hill with every round you've saved. I started copying invoices, collecting mail, quietly asking questions, just not to people in the building. There's a guy I know named Elijah Pearson. Former military accountant, runs a little advisory firm for nonprofits that don't want to end up in orange jumpsuits. He owed me a favor. I cashed it in. Within 3 weeks, we traced over $430,000 moved into shell LLCs, names I didn't recognize, but addresses that didn't lie. One was Mary's sister's nail salon in Westport. Another? A consulting agency registered to the home of our deputy director's boyfriend. They were moving cash through the walls like termites in a church pew. I brought it all to the board chairman, retired Judge Walter Hemphill. Thought he was clean. Thought maybe he'd give a damn. He gave me a pat on the shoulder, said he'd look into it, and 2 days later my access card stopped working. That's when I knew. This wasn't a crack. It was the foundation. The whole thing was rot. I was supposed to walk away. Be grateful they didn't smear me or drag up some old VA incident. But I'd buried too many friends to back down now. So I started planning something I'd never done before. Something surgical. Something final. I opened a new bank account. Under a business name I'd never used. Freedom Ridge Health Partners. Sounded official. Elijah helped me set it up. We made a website, bought a domain, filled it with stock photos, and made up testimonials. Then I started making phone calls. Quiet ones. To donors. Big ones. I told them we were organizing a surprise private grant match for St. Luke's 25th anniversary. A special donor, Anonymous, would match up to $500,000 if they raised the first half by June. I was the anonymous donor, and I wasn't matching a damn thing. I was watching them scramble for the cash, watching Mary and her crooks collect like jackals in the dirt, waiting for the lion to blink. But I wasn't blinking. And what they didn't know was that every dollar they touched this time would be traceable. Every wire. Every fake invoice. Every lie. Because this time I'd written the script. And they were walking straight into it. The first donation came from a retired investment banker in Cincinnati. His wife had spent her final months at St. Luke's before we ever had proper oxygen tanks, back when I was still sleeping in a storage closet on winter shifts just to keep the pipes from freezing. $10,000. Mary made a Facebook video holding the check. Said words like impact and legacy and serving the forgotten. She didn't say my name. That was fine. I wasn't looking for a spotlight, I was building one. One bright enough to burn the whole mess down. By the end of the week, we had $70,000 in. All through the campaign. All through the fund I'd fabricated from top to bottom. But here's the thing, they didn't check anything. Not the donor terms. Not the clauses. Not even the origin of the new account that was supposedly matching their efforts. They were too busy gloating. Too busy skimming. Elijah monitored the activity like a hawk. The moment funds hit the St. Luke's account, they were being redirected, some to staff bonuses, some to contractor payments for work that never happened. One payment went to a man listed as security consultant. He was Mary's nephew. 19. Unemployed. Lives with his mom in a 2-bedroom on Riverbend Lane. I took a walk down there. Old habits. Just wanted to see the face of a kid who was getting paid $3,000 for risk assessment while veterans with spinal injuries used walkers from 1982. He was sitting on the porch eating pizza. Brand new sneakers. Didn't recognize me? Of course he didn't. Back at the clinic, morale was low. New restrictions. Less food. The generator failed one night and no one fixed it until I threatened to call the fire marshal. A guy named Ben, Marine, amputee, hell of a chess player, asked me why the walls felt thinner. They're hollow now, I said. He didn't ask what I meant. By April, the campaign had raised $230,000. And Mary had already reallocated more than half into shadow accounts. That's when I started leaking. Not information. Not yet. Stories. A woman at the Courier-Journal owed me a favor from way back. I gave her names of donors, of beneficiaries, of veterans who didn't make it. I let her sniff around. Not too much. Just enough to create tension. She wrote a soft piece. St. Luke's celebrates growth amid veteran challenges. A nothing burger. But the point wasn't exposure. The point was to make Mary feel safe. Safe enough to steal with confidence. The trap was nearly set. I just needed one final thing. A public ceremony. I called in my own name. An anonymous donor offering to appear for a final photo op to mark the match deadline. I told Mary's assistant I'd only reveal myself at the event. Called myself Daniel A. after my late brother. I gave them just enough to chase the dream. They planned the whole thing in 2 weeks, press, ribbon cutting, guest list. Meanwhile, I handed everything to the IRS. That's the part most people don't get. When you've served, you learn patience. You learn that sometimes the best shot isn't when the enemy's charging, it's when they think they've won. I watched from across the street the day of the ceremony. I wore my old army cap. No one noticed me. Mary was radiant. Pearl earrings. New coat. Spoke into a mic about transformation. The mayor's office sent a rep. A few journalists showed up. So did the woman from the Courier-Journal. She didn't know yet how deep it would go. At exactly 1:15 p.m., an email dropped to every donor from the campaign. Your matched contributions were part of a federal sting operation into financial fraud by executives at St. Luke's Outreach Clinic. Details enclosed. With attachments. Invoices. Wire transfers. False signatures. Shell companies. And a list of every patient who went untreated while the funds were funneled. The journalists started checking their phones. Mary's smile started to fade. 10 minutes later, a black sedan from the Department of Justice pulled into the lot. They didn't cuff her there. Too many cameras. But they asked for a private word. That was enough. Back at the clinic, I packed my things. I didn't need to stay anymore. Ben watched me from his bunk. You leaving? I was never supposed to stay. You did good, Roy. No, I said. I did right. There's a difference. 2 days after the ceremony, the local news ran the story. Not on the front page, not yet, but it was there. Veterans Clinic investigated over alleged misuse of federal donations. Mary's face was blurred, but anyone who'd ever shaken her hand knew exactly who it was. A 32-second clip showed her walking briskly out of the press tent, jaw tight, flanked by 2 men in dark coats. One carried a folder thick enough to drop a career. The other was holding a badge. The real fallout started online. Donors demanded answers. 3 of them filed civil suits before the week was over. Senator McDowell, who'd smiled beside me at that photo op 3 years ago, released a statement: "If veterans are being exploited for profit, we will seek full accountability." Full accountability. I didn't smile. I'd buried too many friends for something as hollow as poetic justice. This wasn't poetry. This was repair. But it was far from over. I stayed quiet. Let the wires burn without me. Elijah kept me updated on back-end financial freezes. One account suspended, then another. IRS agents flagged a $52,000 consulting fee paid to the boyfriend of the director of community engagement. The office no longer had a director of community anything. Mary went on leave for health reasons. Her assistant left town. The deputy director deleted all his social media and didn't show up to the clinic again. Inside St. Luke's, the silence was different now. No more speeches. No more donor tours with fresh-pressed scrubs and fake smiles. Just the raw sound of people doing real work with less fear and no illusions. It reminded me of the barracks the morning after an ambush, quieter than you'd expect, not because people were gone, but because they'd seen something that stripped away the nonsense. The board called an emergency session. I wasn't invited. So I went anyway. I stood outside holding a box of printed files. No fanfare. No accusation in my voice. Just paper and silence. Judge Hemphill wouldn't meet my eyes. The others glanced at me like I was a ghost. One woman muttered, "We didn't know," and I just handed her the folder.
Sorry to interrupt your viewing experience, but we really need your support, namely a subscription to the channel, which can make it possible to hire a professional voice actor and make the best content for you.
She took it like it was hot to the touch. Inside was everything. The fake payroll reports. The duplicate invoices. The training seminars that never existed. All cross-referenced, time-stamped, printed in plain font. I didn't threaten. I didn't shout. I just said this. You're going to fix this. Not for me. Not even for them. For yourself. Because this doesn't go away. And if you don't correct it, I will. Publicly. Relentlessly. Then I walked out. A week later, Elijah called. They've started issuing repayment notices to staff. 6 resignations in 4 days. And guess what else? What? They appointed a federal oversight coordinator. St. Luke's is now under restricted audit. You burned the rock clean, Roy. I nodded, though he couldn't see it. No, I said. I just gave them the match. That Friday, Ben invited me to a card game with some of the guys. I hadn't played in years, but I went. He dealt the first hand like it was nothing. No ceremony. No big welcome. Just a seat at the table. You're not going to keep fighting forever, right? He asked, eyes half-lidded from meds, but still sharp. I don't fight. I correct. He laughed once. Same damn thing, brother. That night, I walked the halls slower than usual. I watched a new nurse and actual hire checking vitals. The food trays were better. We had new socks in the supply closet. And someone had finally fixed the leaky faucet in the east wing. A small victory, sure. But for the first time in years, the air didn't smell like resignation. It smelled like repair. The press started circling harder after the audit went public. NBC picked up the story only 2 minutes, buried deep in the afternoon slot, but enough to stoke the fire. Donations mismanaged at Kentucky Veterans Clinic, officials under review. Then came the podcast interviews. Then the op-eds. They started using words like systemic failure, veteran exploitation, fraud masked as charity. I didn't call anyone. I didn't need to. I just kept showing up to St. Luke's like always. Mopped the floors. Repaired the shelves. Took out the trash, just like before, only this time, the trash wasn't just physical. And then, like clockwork, came the email from Mary. Subject line, "Please, Roy." No punctuation. No signature. No explanation. Just a message full of white space and desperation. I didn't reply. There's no reply to a decade of theft. 3 days later, her lawyer filed a motion in district court claiming the actions taken by Mr. Roy Beckett represented a malicious campaign of personal vengeance. They were playing the whistleblower retaliation card. It would have been laughable if it wasn't so predictable. My lawyer, retired JAG, sharp as hell, told me not to engage. Let the evidence speak. They're cornered. The more noise they make, the worse they look. Still, I couldn't sleep that night. The idea that after everything, she'd try to frame this as my ego bruised by power. As if I wanted control. I wanted bedsheets without holes. I wanted medicine that wasn't expired. I wanted my dead friend Harold's name removed from their fundraising brochure because they let him bleed in a hallway for 40 minutes before calling an ambulance. This wasn't revenge. This was math. St. Luke's board finally went public. Statement read by a man in a cheap suit with watery eyes. We recognize and regret the misuse of donor funds and failure to uphold our core mission. We have accepted the resignations of several key staff members and will cooperate fully with ongoing investigations. Resignations. Not terminations. Not indictments. Just a quiet shuffle out the back door. I wasn't satisfied, so I filed a formal complaint to the Kentucky Attorney General's office under my own name. This time it wasn't anonymous. This time I wanted it on the record. And then I took the final step. I sat down with Anna Cruz, investigative journalist with WDRB, and I told her everything. Not just the embezzlement. Not just the fake vendors. I told her about Harold, his last moments. About Ben, who hadn't had a proper insulin dosage in months because the grant got delayed. About the board dinners I catered, where veterans were refused seconds but donors were handed filet mignon with gold leaf dessert. She asked if I wanted my name changed. I told her no. I'm not the one who needs to hide. The story aired on a Thursday night. Full 7 minutes. Interviews with 3 former staff members, 1 ex-donor, and a nurse who broke NDA to go on record. By Friday, St. Luke's had lost 4 major donors and was under emergency review from the Federal Grant Committee. The same committee I'd once helped write reports for. I stood outside that night, cigarette in hand, watching 2 men carry out boxes from the admin wing. Mary's office. I knew those boxes. I'd packed a few like that in Kandahar when we pulled out in the dark and left our allies behind. Only difference? Those people deserved better. These ones didn't. The lawsuit came in officially on the 2nd Monday of June. Defamation. Emotional distress. Career sabotage. Mary's legal team argued that my fabricated narrative had destroyed her livelihood. That I'd manipulated data. That I'd acted out of jealousy for being pushed out of relevance. They attached a photo of me from the 2020 food drive, handing out soup in a raincoat like it proved something. What it proved was that I was there. Every damn day. While she made speeches, I was wiping blood off the tile. The press covered the lawsuit, of course. Gave her airtime. Disgraced director pushes back against retaliatory accusations. Talk shows spun it like a drama. A battle between egos. The aging veteran versus the ambitious administrator. David and Goliath with donations. The part that stung wasn't the lie, it was how easily people bought it. The clinic changed. A new acting director stepped in, young, green, decent. Name was Terry Gleason. Never served but listened well. Had the right instincts. When he asked if I wanted to be on the oversight committee, I said no. I'm not the future, I told him. Just the guy who patched the hole. But that hole, I realized, had let more than just fraud in. It had let rot take root in me too. I was starting to feel it bone deep. I hadn't slept right in weeks. Not because of guilt. Because of the silence. The kind that comes after you drop the final hammer. Then came the call. Elijah, my old friend, always steady. You might want to sit down, he said. The state had uncovered a second set of books. Hidden deeper. Older. Mary wasn't just skimming funds from federal grants. She'd been cooking numbers on veteran mortality records to inflate performance metrics. Fewer deaths meant more renewal money. A tidy lie that brought in another $1.2 million over 5 years. That meant Harold's death, the one in the hallway, was officially listed as off-premise. They pretended it happened in the ambulance. They rewrote the end of his life like it was a clerical error. That night, I drove to the small cemetery east of town. Sat by Harold's grave with a folding chair and a bottle of something strong. Sorry it took this long, I said out loud. Sorry they used you like that. I didn't cry. I'd done my crying in desert tents and dark motels years ago. But I felt something burn in my throat. Not pain. Not regret. Resolve. If Mary wanted a war, I'd give her one. But it wouldn't be in court. I made one last move. Quietly. A whistleblower fund, legally structured, built with donations from the same people Mary once sweet-talked. Anonymous. Protected. I gave it a new name. The Harold Miles Fund. Not for lawsuits. Not for headlines. For repair. For vet clinics like St. Luke's across the country, places hanging on by a thread, run by saints and skeleton crews. Places that needed someone to watch. The media picked it up. Not as a story of rage, but of endurance. Vet who exposed clinic fraud starts fund in friend's name. That was all I wanted. No interviews. No legacy. Just something that lasted longer than the next lie. In court, Mary's lawsuit was dismissed. Lack of evidence. Overwhelming counterfilings. Her legal team dropped her quietly. The final blow wasn't mine, it was truth lined up in paper trails and policies. She gambled that public sympathy would outweigh private fraud. But truth, real truth, was heavier than spin. Mary never showed up to the final board hearing. Didn't have to. By then, her name had already been removed from every plaque, every certificate, every brochure that once made her the smiling face of St. Luke's. Terry gave me a folder one morning while I was fixing the busted water heater. Everything's signed, he said. They wanted you to know. The clinic's officially part of the state oversight program now. Monthly audits. Transparency across the board. I nodded, didn't open the folder. That wasn't my victory. It was just cleanup. I moved out of the tiny room in the back a week later. Took my cot, the radio, and my army duffel full of files I didn't need anymore. There was a new volunteer team now, nurses mostly. Younger guys. A few who'd served in Iraq after I did. They knew what the place had been. What it had almost become. And they weren't going to let it rot again. 3 months passed. The Harold Miles Fund began to spread. 2 clinics in West Virginia. 1 in New Mexico. Another in Detroit. Elijah called me once a week to update me on progress. We never talked long. Didn't need to. He was building something I never could. Not revenge. Legacy. I took a job fixing HVAC systems at a middle school in Ohio. Quiet work. Paid the bills. No headlines, no lawsuits, no cameras. But every Friday, like clockwork, I'd sit at the bus station downtown and wait. Just watch people. Saw men like me. Calloused hands. Faded ball caps. Limping just a little when they thought no one was looking. Sometimes I'd slide a folded paper into the seat beside them. A flyer for the fund. No name. Just a number. Just a way out. Most of them never called. Some did. And that was enough. The last time I heard Mary's name, it came from a clerk at the courthouse. I was dropping off records for a property tax appeal. She mentioned that Mary had taken a plea, no contest to federal misappropriation. 6 years probation. Barred from nonprofit work. Fined. Not jailed. I didn't flinch. Justice rarely fits the crime. But at least this time, the lie didn't win. One night, sitting outside my small rental, I pulled out the old pocket journal I kept from my time in Fallujah. Flipped to a torn page near the back. A note I'd written after watching a field medic save a boy with half a lung and no chance. It said, "Don't survive for survival's sake. Survive to fix something." I hadn't read it in years, but it still held. Final reflection. I used to think the worst betrayal was when someone took your trust and burned it for personal gain. But the truth? The worst betrayal is what you do to yourself when you let it slide. When you stay silent. When you excuse the cracks in a system because it's easier than making noise. Mary didn't destroy St. Luke's. We did. By watching it happen. By pretending that kindness could fix corruption. Well, kindness is a bandage. Justice is a blade. And sometimes to make a place livable again, you have to cut it open. So no, I'm not a hero. I'm just the guy who stayed long enough to finish what he started. And that's something the next man won't have to do. Not alone.
What do you think of the story? Write in the comments.